What sort of things am I going to be looking at this morning? Well, firstly, we'll look at the concept where the employment relationship is terminated by agreement. In other words, agreement is reached between the employer and the employee to terminate that relationship. We'll then look at a slightly more historic aspect of the termination process, that where the contract is determined and terminated through performance. Then a short section on where operation of law kicks in so as to terminate the employment relationship, and then a sizable section on notice, where either the employee or the employer gives notice to terminate the employment relationship. And we'll look at some of the rights that are available to the employee during that notice period. And then finally, the one that most litigators are concerned with the most, the concept of breach, whether the employer has acted in breach or the employee themselves have acted in breach. What of statutory provisions? Well, of course, the way that our legislation system works is that the government comes up with policy, it creates legislation, and legislation is then enacted through Parliament. And from time to time, you may find that the introduction of certain pieces of legislation will have the effect of terminating the employment relationship. Let me give you two examples from my own practice, if I may. Firstly, let's say we've got one of these sort of Quango boards, those quasi-non-governmental organizations, and you've got an employee who is employed by one of those organizations. But the government decides that it's going to abolish that particular Quango and therefore legislates to, if you like, repeal the actual Quango or board or whatever it may be. And of course, that legislation upon repealing the board means that the law has effectively terminated the contract of employment between the employee and the board. In terms of the actual payment itself, well, obviously, employees with normal working hours, it's very straightforward. Section 88 of the Employment Rights Act makes it clear that the period of notice, if you like, that 4-week period that I'm giving in my example, in respect of that, it's as though the employee is employed up to the effective date of termination and they're just paid their salary in the usual way. If, however, you're dealing with employees with irregular hours, with no normal working hours, then the provisions of Section 89 kick into play. And what you do with that is that you look at the average pay over a 12-week reference period in order to calculate a week's pay for the purposes of the calculation of the notice pay.